Good evening and welcome to the Climate Change edition of The Union Show. Let's get straight into it with some legislative background.
The Copenhagen Climate Change Summit in December will see nations across the globe seek agreement on carbon emission reduction targets for the 21st century. Recently, the federal government's proposed legislation was rejected in the Senate, where the opposition, as a means of forestalling a pre-Copenhagen agreement, cited the government's refusal to negotiate on emissions trading. The Rudd government was then forced to separate the renewable energy target from the emissions trading scheme, and the legislation for the renewable energy component passed through the Senate late last month. For 25 years, the CFMEU has stood proudly at the forefront in calling for action on climate change. CFMEU National President and now ACTU Climate Change Group Chairman Tony Mayer spoke on the proud history of his union.
Well, our Mining and Energy Division has been tracking this for 25 years. We've been participated in the original 1993 Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit that developed the first UN instrument on climate change. We're at Kyoto and we've been at Bali, Poznan, Copenhagen, all those meetings, and we've never been sceptics. We've tried to lead our members on this issue. It's a difficult demographic, you'd appreciate, but our members have been convinced to reject the sceptics and take the view that we want to be part of the solution. And so people are quite proud that the union's taking the stance it's taking.
General consensus in the union movement is that a 20% reduction target is too modest, but all want some commitment on an emissions target prior to Copenhagen.
The ACTU would like to see the carbon pollution reduction scheme passed as quickly as possible. It's not perfect, it does need to be strengthened, it needs to have some things built into it and some strong industry policy that actually ensures new clean energy industries start to grow rapidly.
Well, I think an emissions trading system's a start. I think the CPRS is okay. It's a necessary but not sufficient driver of change. We will get an emissions trading scheme one way or another in this country, but we need additional measures. We've got a good one, the renewable energy target, which we've strongly supported. That will drive the increased use of renewable technologies. It won't, though, bring forward necessarily the breakthrough technologies that we need, the emerging technologies like solar thermal, geothermal, tidal, to name a few.
We also would like to see a fair bit of revenue from the sale of permits to big business, then be transferred across and invested in the new clean energy industries to get them going, and so that there's a good, strong flow of investment to those industries.
Rowan Dowland of the Climate Project Australia, a joint project between Al Gore and the Australian Conservation Foundation, calls for immediate action on climate change.
One thing's really clear about climate change: inaction is going to compound risks, both to individuals, to communities, to countries, to companies, and of course to jobs. The magnitude of the climate change challenge is so great that it is essential that government, business and NGOs, including trade unions, all work together to solve the crisis and take advantage of the opportunities.
These opportunities come about in the form of new technologies and industries, and jobs they create for Australian workers.
Our main contribution at the moment is to speak on behalf of our members, not on behalf of an industry, on behalf of workers. That's our role, and to give our members hope that they're not part of a problem but part of a solution. Because the upside to this bad story about climate change is that there'll be a lot of money and a lot of jobs in the fixing of the problem.
Federal legislation is an integral start to national and international commitment to climate change action, but it cannot stand alone. It needs continued support, starting with government investment.
This round of legislation that's in the Parliament at the moment is not the end of the matter. If you can have an emissions trading scheme, you can have a renewable energy target. If you're going to encourage the renewable and other technologies that we need, you need to have direct investment by the government. And the people in the technological world and the finance world keep telling us that that is inevitable because the technologies won't happen on the scale we need them unless that occurs.
You need massive investment. You need billions and billions of dollars to basically start new industries, entire new industries, and also start to clean up the processes of old and existing industries. And unless you do that, you're not going to get the jobs growth and you're not going to get the transformation in the economy that's then going to drive our ability to cut emissions in the atmosphere. You can't understate the urgency of this. And for those dinosaurs in Canberra in business who are trying to hold up the legislation and delay and argue for inaction, are completely down the wrong path.
It does take a whole of government approach, and really unless heads of government drive an international agreement on emissions reductions, there won't be one.
Climate change is an issue that frequently dominates the nation's media coverage, and for good reason. It is a crisis, and it requires attention and commitment on a national and international scale.
Just in the last week, the United Nations has issued 2 reports. One of them shows that already 300,000 people a year are dying because of climate change on this planet. And we've seen the disasters in our own country this year, with 500 to 1,000 people dying in the heat wave at the start of this year here in southern Australia.
I think that the problem is serious. It is a crisis. 2 things that are driving it into crisis territory are 2 things that are inevitable. And one is the industrial revolution occurring in India and China, the 2 most populous nations, and the drive from 6 billion people to 9 billion people. That's what's going to happen by mid-century. That's what makes it such a crisis. If we didn't have such growth, if we had flat growth all around the world, it would be a lot more manageable as an environmental problem.
The main issue of the Copenhagen summit will no doubt be that of burden sharing. Developing nations such as China and India believe it is the responsibility of wealthy industrialised nations, such as the UK and US, to set a clear example on cutting carbon emissions. The Chinese government argues that it has a moral right to develop and grow its economy, and that carbon emissions will inevitably grow with it.
The developing world have got a bloody good argument. That is that they've got a right to develop. And we stuff the planet in our development over 200 years. They're going to reach the same level of development in 20 years in a number of the major countries. And we can't sit back like imperialists and say, oh, you can't develop. You have to live in poverty. We have to do it at almost the worst possible time in humanity. We have to switch to a low carbon economy, so it's a real challenge. And I don't think governments have got all the answers, and I think a lot of them don't quite know the extent of the challenge they face.
Join us after the break for more of The Union Show. Welcome back to the climate change edition of The Union Show. Now we'll take a look at the development of new technologies and the need for industry planning and regulation by the government.
How you fix climate change, which started off as an environment problem, they were meetings of environment ministers. The answer is to restructure the economy. So now at Bali and Poznan and in Copenhagen, you will have finance ministers, trade ministers, industry ministers, as well as environment ministers, and you'll have heads of government. And you actually do need that because you need the people in the room who are going to deliver and who know most about how to restructure economies.
The government's emissions trading scheme is seen by many as just the first step in the economic restructuring process required to effectively cut this country's greenhouse emissions.
What investors tell me is necessary is for the next 10 or 20 of those solar thermal plants or those CCS plants or those geothermal plants, bearing in mind that we have to replace our whole fleet by about 2040, governments will have to be involved. I mean, governments have to steer the development of all of these technologies. You can't allow the market to determine these things. And I suppose the safeguard we've got is that the market won't deliver any of these technologies in the next decade when we need them.
Early this year, the federal government made an initial investment into the development of renewable technologies as part of the global financial crisis stimulus package. Tony Mayer foresees continued government investment and regulation paving the way for a 20-year outdoor laboratory that will see development of a wide range of renewable technologies.
The government actually has done a pretty credible job in tough economic times, global financial crisis. They found several $1 billion to put into flagship energy projects. They put $1.5 billion into the solar thermal flagship demonstration projects, which will see 3 or 4 solar thermal plants be built. Some will be standalone solar thermal plants. Some will augment coal-fired power stations to reduce the amount of coal that's burnt. They did the same with carbon capture and storage demonstration flagship programs. We know that storage at large scale works. In Norway, at the Sleipner project, they inject 1 million tonnes a year. The recently announced Gorgon project in northwest Australia will be a CCS project. It will inject 1 million tonnes a year underground. So I think it'll be part of the mix. The proportion of our future energy mix that it represents will depend on the next 2 decades of field work in that great outdoor laboratory. If it doesn't measure up in terms of technology, safety and cost, then you won't see much of it. If it does, it's a good opportunity to reduce our emissions.
Because Australia is not a big market, any economic development of renewable technologies will be driven by the potential for export. While research and development results in the export of intellectual property, the major underwriter of any Australian export market has always been a strong manufacturing sector. Dean Mile of the ETU recently travelled to Germany to attend the Intersolar Trade Fair to see firsthand the solar technologies available and to speak to manufacturers about the potential of solar power in the Australian market.
We approached Shot Solar, who's probably the world's best solar panel manufacturer. They are very, very good. The laws allow companies over there to go to a mob like, imagine Coles nationally with massive roof spaces on their shopping centres and say, we want to lease your roof space for 20 years. And it makes it economically viable for the person who owns the building. It makes it viable for the company to do the install, and of course then you get manufacturing jobs growth with the panels, installation, maintenance jobs, and it all spins pretty well.
If you don't manufacture anything, or if you don't have a resources industry, or if you don't have that changes, or have an agricultural industry of any significance, that changes the structure of the society. And we've got a pretty good society. It's mixed, and industry policy is a way to keep a good balance. We could actually have a growing industry if you get low emission energy. You can expand your energy sector. That may make places like the Latrobe Valley valuable destinations for future heavy industries or manufacturing industries. Take steel. I mean, steel is not something, you listen to some people, you'd think steel's a dirty industry, we've got to get rid of it. By mid-century, the world will use more steel than it produces now, not less. Same with concrete, same with everything else, because the same things that are driving catastrophic climate change are going to drive global growth. So we should hang on to our steel industry. Wind turbines and solar panels and all of those developing technologies, CCS pipelines, they all require steel in enormous quantities. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Heavy industry is not an industry of the past. It has to be part of this century's economic development. And we either have it here or we don't. We can design smarter 21st century WTO compliant industry policies, but we've got to get cracking and working on it. So the unions are actually producing a major report about this, and we're going to keep pushing the government because it's a real challenge for them. I think they get the challenge about climate change, and I think they get the challenge that it's economic. But it's a real challenge for them to actually acknowledge that they need industry policy. They do themselves a disservice by just pigeonholing unions of one of, dozens of stakeholders. Many of the stakeholders they engage with and give equal billing to are mere shells, don't have any members, don't really represent anything, and aren't part of the community, but they're a lobby group. If they really want to engage with the community, they get more community input from listening to organised labour than they will get from any number of community cabinet meetings. I always say to governments, look, if you want to know if this is a fair income claim by industry, why don't you ask the relevant union? Because they're likely to weigh up better than most if it really is an important application.
After the break, jobs, jobs, jobs. You're watching The Union Show. Now let's take a look at the economic benefits of restructuring the industry in a climate-friendly way.
The need to address environmental issues has often been weighed against an economic cost. However, the product of a change to renewable energy technologies will in fact be a revitalisation of our manufacturing sector, leading to a massive growth in opportunities for retraining and employment.
Last year we commissioned a report with the Australian Conservation Foundation from an independent research company on the number of jobs that could be generated by making a transition to a clean energy economy. And the numbers that came up were that within the next 2 decades we could create at least 850,000 new clean energy jobs in 6 industries alone. And since the report came out last year, the green global market has actually risen to be about $6 trillion now, $6.1 trillion. It has grown so rapidly in the space of a year that we can almost pretty confidently say there'll be at least 1 million new jobs in the next 20 years in the clean green industries alone. And that's before you even look at transport, that's before you actually look at the numbers of jobs involved in greening up existing technology and existing industry. So there's a lot of work and a lot to be gained by making the move now. If we move early, we can have these jobs. The longer we delay it, it'll cost more to make the transition. That's why we need to get going now.
The ETU's Dean Mile believes that we should follow Germany's lead in solar job creation.
The ETU sees renewable energy as a massive opportunity for skills enhancement in Australia and jobs. There's all sorts of technologies available, and what we wanted to look at is who does it best in the world, and everyone tells us it's Germany. Their laws are right, their legislation's right. They have 250,000 renewable energy jobs in wind, solar and biomass. They've got their infrastructure right. They're beating China on manufacturing. We thought that was worth looking at and what's relevant to our members in terms of job opportunities and skill opportunities. And we thought the ETU should take a lead on that and start to drive the debate for our members' interest back here. So here you have a massive job creation opportunity in this country and in this state, and our politicians don't learn from the world's best practice. It's a bloody tragedy, it really is.
What we do now in government policy and union activity about these policy changes will determine what job opportunities we have. We can do this with the minimum jobs outcome or the maximum jobs outcome. The minimum jobs outcome means that the ones that can't be offshored occur here, such as the installation of insulation, the erection of wind turbines, recycling has to happen here, and that will grow with government regulation. So there are sort of almost a fixed number or a fixed percentage of jobs that have to be here. The bulk of jobs that are created by things like the renewable energy target, an emissions trading scheme and all the rest will be created, but they may not be created here, and largely that's manufacturing. And so, in order to get the maximum jobs from this economic restructuring, we need to have an industry development program to go hand in hand with every one of our environment policies. The renewable energy target is a good environment policy, but nobody has thought about what needs to go with it to ensure the maximum jobs outcome.
In the past decade, many jobs, first in manufacturing, then in research and development, have moved to developing countries. Dean Mile believes that increased investment in plant installations is necessary to regain R&D jobs.
The opportunities in Australia for renewable energies are fantastic. We have excellent wind regimes for wind generation. We have plenty of sunlight, and so our regimes for our sunlight for generating solar power are fantastic. We have plenty of heat sources underground that can be tapped in to tap in for steam to drive generators, and those technologies are coming online all along. But you have to ask the government, if you've got all these mandatory renewable energy targets, you're ratified Kyoto, you want to be seen doing the right thing, and this is to Kevin Rudd in particular, well then it's about time you thought about how you're going to start to generate electricity from renewable energies if you keep kicking the industry in the head. It's dumb, So there's a lot of work to be done in lobbying government for the correct changes to drive an industry. So it's, real challenge.
However, it is not just industry that will need investment. New technologies require new skills, and many unions are starting on the ground, teaching workers how to deal with environmental modifications, both in industry and in the home.
Individual unions are doing things such as the Plumbers Union, have set up their Climate Action Centre with the industry, with the plumbing industry and with government here. The ambition to retrain and upskill 21,000 Victorian plumbers. They have an ambition to take that national as well. The ACTU is pushing very hard to get as many productivity places as possible to get a national skills training program going in green skills and clean energy skills. So that's being negotiated through Skills Australia with the federal government at the moment. So we're working pretty hard to make sure that we're ready for the transition and that we're pulling our weight, doing as much as we possibly can in workplaces and in a policy setting.
For us too, we had to look at the training, because for electrical workers in renewable energy systems isn't something you're trained in your apprenticeship. It is a unique skill set in its own right. Well, the union's got a course that it's developed to do that, a renewable energy training course, which is fantastic and is immensely popular. We just can't fit everyone in it that wants to do it. So members want to train, they want to understand renewable technologies, and we really want to be the lead agency for training people on renewable energy industry. We're not profit motivated, we believe in it, we really want our members to have those skills.